you summing up the decade in a way. It's kind of interesting, you know, because you the record which you were sort of just implying is a little bit of a burden came out 2000 and sort of set you off, and then it's been a funny little journey since for you, but it has been this 10-year journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, weirdly, like I can't believe it is the end of the noughties this decade, because it doesn't feel like it's been that long. In some ways it doesn't feel that long, but the first album, Our Bewilderbeast, was released in June 2000, and it came out the same day as Coldplay's debut as well, which was a weird coincidence, because we kind of had dealings with each other before that point. Coldplay were really, really supportive of me, actually, and then they just took off in on a different league. And my first album went on to win the Mercury prize that year, so that was a really bit of an odd thing to happen. Your first album, to have success so quick. So it's been downhill from there, really. The last few years has been, the last 3 years really has been a bit of a barren period for me. But it's not through want of trying or not trying even. It's I've never stopped writing, but I just haven't felt like what I've done recently has connected with myself as much as it normally does.
So what kind of effect has Bewilderbeast had on you in terms of, you know, it winning the award? It turned into a kind of weird sort of celebrity as well, you know, and the name almost became a brand name, and it almost seemed to contradict the kind of personality you actually were, you know.
I still struggle with it to this day, the name and everything, because it seems to have put me. I think anybody that's in the public eye has a degree of this thing of what you are when you're at home in your own time and space is pretty much nothing to do with what you are, the way people perceive you, and that's not even just a celebrity thing. I think it's everybody. And any human being that is in the house at home is a different one to when they're perceived by others. So it's not a big deal to deal with that, but it gets exaggerated when you're in the public eye for doing something that people like or don't like. And having a pseudonym exaggerates that too. Badly Drawn Boy.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a joke in the first place. The first EP I did in '97 was the name Badly Drawn Boy was a kind of a joke for that first album EP, and I thoroughly intended trying to find a better name, but because it did so well, I'd be in bars in Manchester and there'd be people on the next table talking about Badly Drawn Boy, and nobody knew who I was, and so that was quite intriguing. The name permeated somehow, and people started buying this EP that I'd put out, and then, but forward into Bewilderbeast, it was just, I mean, that was like the typical labour of love of like, for me it was 28, 30 years when that album came out, so it was kind of my whole life had been put into that one document. And I think, I mean, sometimes I get cheesed off when people keep bringing up that album, but at least they like something I've done. I think it captured a moment for some reason.
Yeah, what do you think the reason was?
I just think the way, I think the name, I used it as I'm typically self-deprecating. I think that's a very kind of maybe Mancunian thing anyway. Or it goes the other way if you're a Gallagher and you're completely not self-deprecating, saying you're the best thing in the world. So it's one or the other, or a bit of both. Yeah. But I think the name was part of me being, I shouldn't really be here. But that's part of the appeal as well. Because growing up in Manchester, or Bolton and Manchester, I felt so connected to things like the Smiths and James in their early days as well. I mean, I always say early days. Tim Booth thinks I must hate them now, but I just particularly loved that early James period. And
so you're doing the same thing to them that you're
playing exactly,
about to do.
Yeah, exactly. Which just goes to show you, doesn't it? But I think people just have a fondness of those beginnings of somebody. Doesn't mean they don't like what's happened since. It's just there's something about the start of something that people buy into and remember with a fondness, I suppose.
So during the decade, then, has there been a lot of anxiety for you about the fact that, in a way, by having a sort of big hit in a way, an alternative hit, but it was a big hit, at least the kind of expectations, what people expect from you, and in a way that was difficult for you to conform to?
I think it just set this weird precedent that it was, like you say, it wasn't a massive worldwide hit like other artists get, but in terms of where I was coming from or where I came from, it was massively a bigger hit than anyone could have thought of, because I was just this cottage industry artist with my own label, and then suddenly that first album just seemed to connect with a lot more people than I could have dreamed of, and then you quickly adjust to that, and then I went on tour and did all the other things, and then so it's been. I'm still kind of looking back on it now and thinking, I feel dead fortunate, but I can't quite believe it's all happened. But you have to just get used to that's what you do. This is what I do for a living. I still can't believe I do music.
Yeah.
As a job.
I was going to ask you actually. Are you pleased now that you are a musician, that you became a musician?
I don't know. I still feel like it was all a big mistake, and I've heard other people say that, but I genuinely do believe not either a mistake or fate, both the same thing in a way, because I wanted to be a sound engineer when I was a teenager. I worked in recording studios, and that's all I wanted. I had this dream of being recording people. That's all I wanted to do, and I spent 18 months in a studio in Bury and then one in Old Trafford, and I got fairly good at certain skills, but I just didn't quite make it beyond the T-boy or the gopher. But I'd learned so much from that environment, and that's when I started to pick up instruments, because there'd be a day where the band didn't turn up, and I'd just sit at the piano and I taught myself to play the piano and the guitar in that period of time, and then I was dabbling with 4-tracks to learn the skills of engineering, and one day just realised that I'd recorded something that was original, and that got me into that bug of like, I'd just done that. Wow, can I do it again? So it was just that was a big mistake or a big happening of fate, whichever way you look at it. And I mean, the first thing I recorded ever when I first learned to play the guitar was Johnny Marr's version of Walk Away Renee, the Billy Bragg B-side, and that's kind of how I started to play the guitar, by finger picking, and that's still the way I play today, because I listened to it and worked it out. It took me a while, a few weeks, and then I recorded it just to see if I could record it and make it sound good, and that was it. I got the bug for me playing the guitar and recorded, and then through my 20s I just suddenly realised that perhaps I could write music and songs, and it just, I tried other people singing, nobody could sing the songs the way I wanted to hear them, so I ended up by default being a singer as well, because I don't think I'm a very good singer. I think I can just express myself better than somebody else could. So it's all those things, but I think that's part and parcel of it. So I do feel proud of all that, and I feel proud of a connection to Manchester, even though I'm not sure I'm a part of it. But other people say I am, so I'm happy with that.
You seem to be part of the story, and a good point of the story as well, when it might have been getting a bit Oasis, if you like, and sort of going into a bit of, slightly cartoony, carry-on-y thing. It was almost like you were sort of weird antidote to that in a way, that it just took it away a little bit from the panto.
I think that was just luck as well on my part, because there was that point in the mid-90s where Oasis was so huge, and you go to any of the bars in Manchester on any given night and day or something like that, or the Roadhouse, and there'd be just a plethora of 4 lads in a band trying to be the next Oasis, and so when I emerged as a quirky kind of solo artist that didn't know what the hell I was doing on stage, I mean, I was probably absolutely rubbish, I must admit. The first few gigs I was shocking, and I had such mixed reviews, people saying I was the best thing ever or the worst thing ever. I was in The Enemy and The Melody Maker the same week, same picture of me at this gig in the Beer Keller in Manchester, and one was saying I was the best thing ever, and the other was saying the opposite, and that's kind of what those magazines or papers did a lot of the time anyway, just to contradict each other. And I was upset and bemused, and then I thought, I mean, somebody said in those early days that I'd set back the Manchester music scene by 10 years.
Only 10?
Yeah, I single-handedly set back Manchester music.
Where were they
10
put
years.
you back then?
No, but initially I was upset, and then I thought, God, if I'm that powerful to turn back The Fall, Joy Division, New Order, Oasis, Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, whoever you want to include in the Manchester scene, single-handedly one man turns all that back 10 years, I'll take that. Because it's impossible to do that. You'd have to be God. So I thought, well, whilst it was an insult, it's actually a real compliment.
The name lingered, and the brand name, if you like, lingered. But
yeah, that's what's weird about it. People coming up to you on the street and knowing who you are, but they didn't buy a record. And I'm not particularly in the public eye a lot. I don't do lots of TV. I don't embrace that kind of thing. I'm not shying away from it. It's just not what I want to do. But So I'm constantly, if everybody that came up to me on the street that knew who I was or spotted me, and it's not just about the hat, it's just about they know who you are. And if every one of those had bought one of my records, I'd be probably number one for quite a long time. But they don't. People don't. They know who you are. So that means I've become a celebrity then. So how's that happened? Because I've not really forced that. But maybe that's a positive. Maybe that's just the way it is. People have become part of the consciousness for some reason.
Looking at the decade as like a fan of music or someone who likes music, you know, what have you thought about the way things have developed in that decade? What's your feeling about the patterns that have emerged?
Well, a lot of it's been distorted and tarnished by reality TV, really, and that's been the one big phenomena that's changed, and it's really odd. You would never have thought, when I started out, I mean, I know it's only 10 years ago and music's been going on a lot longer, but going back to that start of 2000, it was inconceivable, really, that every other TV show would be like a reality show, and people would be famous for just being involved in that. And we've all got used to it now, and it's part of the culture and climate, but it's really, really odd, and it's permeated into music, and the internet's changed a lot of things as well, so the way people can access things, some of it's positive, quite a lot of it's negative.
And what do you think's positive and what do you think's negative about that side of it?
Negative in that, it's like in Marky Smith's book we just talked about before we started chatting, but like he touches on it quite a lot, and I totally agree that. But maybe it's just because we're getting on, and we just have to accept that things change, and a new generation. It's just, I remember going to WH Smith's or whichever place it was, on the bus on the way in from school on a Monday night to get the new Smiths single, or whichever band you're into, and holding it on the bus and waiting to put it on. It's just that's just gone now, and I think there's a sadness in that, because I mean, I'm trying to educate my kids in a way, not educate in a patronising way, but let them know that these things. I showed them a record player, and they're like, "What the hell's that?" You know, and because I haven't had a record player for a while, because the last one broke, and I still want to get a new record player, but I've got this little portable one. So I showed them. And they were fascinated by it, that you actually physically put it on wherever you want, but they're still going to be spoiled by technology, like we all are, because it's so convenient to take an iPod on holiday with you, or have it with you whenever you want to hear. So much information in it. So maybe all that's lost, and that's fine. We'll have to get used to that. But there is something missing, essentially, from the connection, the way you grew to love a band because of the difficulty of getting it or something. And now that it just appears as a list in iTunes that all looks the same. Yeah. I mean, people talk about improving it and getting the artwork. You can get the front sleeve on there, but it's still not the same as actually.
I mean, how do you feel you fit into all this? Because you are, for want of a better expression, very much a vinyl age kind of creature. Yeah. And you have faith with those kind of rituals and forms. And yet the world has kind of collapsed, really, and yet everyone's trying to kind of hold on to it, I guess.
Well, I'd like to think. The last few years I've been trying to rack my brains as to a way of achieving. I'd like to think I could pioneer something, like the best way of formatting music where it embraces both the new and the old, and there will be a way of doing it. And I think I could come up with it. And I know I almost did. No, not that I'm an inventor, but I actually thought, because everyone's trying to get too clever about things and trying to overthink it, perhaps. But there is a diluting. There's a diluting effect that's happening because of music. Everything, not just music, just everything being available online. The positive side is that you can access anything you want, whereas you couldn't. If you want to see the Banana Splits, you could stick it in YouTube and go, "Oh, I remember the Banana Splits," possibly. Whereas you'd have had to send off for it to some weird back of a magazine if you wanted that kind of thing. Now you can find more or less anything you want, but that's the positive side, because it's good for information, it's good for your job, research, whatever it is. Or just the world in general, lots of things can happen quicker than they used to, and if it works well and it's positive, then that's a good thing. But the negative side is that detail gets overlooked. But there's still kids now who are growing up in the teenage years and early 20s that are still into going seeing bands live, at least. I I mean, looking back on the decade again, like you said, a few hot spots that happened. Radiohead setting that precedent with the free album thing. I mean, it was a bit of a. I mean, I love that band anyway. They're, they can't do any wrong for me. I just think they're so interesting. But that was a little bit of a weird thing, which I thought in some ways could have been a bit. It was all right for them to do it, and the backlash to them was that, well, what about bands starting out? And that's what I felt. I thought, well, I'm somewhere in the middle, but I wouldn't want to give my album away for free. Not when you've worked 6 months on it. Essentially, it didn't end up free because there was another version of it, and people could pay what they wanted. It was a kind of a clever concept, but it was indicative of the times that we were going through, and the record company, the record industry, sort of dissolving into where it's at now. And so it was a transitional period when Radiohead did that. But I loved Liam Gallagher's quote, that, like, something to do with I wouldn't give my effing record away, not over my dead body, or something, like a real gut reaction, a typical Liam Gallagher quote of. I think he means it, and I wouldn't, because I just think it's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong to give something away for free. But there's a balance to strike, I suppose, with all those things. I don't know where it's at now, but.
What do you make of all? We talked about the fact that all the Beast is in the OMM top 50, isn't it?
You're not supposed to reveal that, but it is indeed.
Oh, am I not?
In the albums of the decade.
All right, I've spoiled the surprise. But do you pay much attention to those kind of roundups? I mean, there's been an acceleration of those as well, hasn't there? Everybody's summing up and trying to control everything and put it into a kind of weird competitive order. I guess you like it when you're in, but I wondered if you pay any attention to them, whether they help you kind of work out your position in music and as a fan and a musician. It's weird,
I think, because we all love watching those roundup lists on TV. There's quite a lot of them now, and the 100 Greatest Magic Tricks was my favourite. That was absolutely genius viewing. That guy floating the light bulb around the room is just a classic. But it's dead interesting telly, and it's probably cheap, so that's why a lot of these things exist. And it's not in telly, but in the media generally, in magazines. There's always a roundup at the end of the year, and it is. I think everybody would be lying if they said they didn't like being included, unless it's. I mean, I've been in the best dressed and worst dressed, believe it or not. You can believe the latter, but I actually made it into the best dressed one year. God knows how that happened, but me and Andy Botel were classed as quite trendy at that time. But I think when you're in there, it is. You'd be lying if you didn't like it. But if you don't make it into those kind of things, like being shortlisted for the Mercury Prize, I think I deserve to have been shortlisted at least once again for one of my subsequent albums to the debut, because they're all as good as the debut. So by pro rata, if my first album won the Mercury Prize, all my others are as good as it. So I should have stood a shot since, surely.
It's funny how you've made that move. Sometimes you've done it yourself during this interview, from being self-deprecating, and I'm not very good actually.
Yeah.
And then suddenly getting really, I should have been in those.
But that's what I'm like on stage. That's why people think I'm an idiot or they love it, because I do flip between saying I'm the worst thing ever to the best. No, it's just, I think it's just being human. But yeah, the way I look at it though is that there's so much music that I love that just isn't ever in the consciousness of most people. So much great music out there that doesn't get listened to or accoladed. Most of my favourite artists are relatively obscure. Whether it's Will Oldham or Jeffrey Lewis, or the people like that just Guided by Voices, I used to listen to all that. They're just. Bob Pollard, I love him, and I can understand people who don't. I try and play his music to people all the time, and they just don't get it. Paddy Considine and me are the two biggest Guided by Voices fans, and for some reason, and that's where my heart is that stuff. I spoke to Bob Pollard about it a few years ago, and I met him at the Roadhouse in Manchester, and I didn't know that he'd know who I was, but he did, and he said, I feel a bit guilty because it was just after About a Boy. So it was my second album, effectively, and that did pretty well. So I felt like I'd sold out in a way, because I'd done okay. Again, being contrary, but and he said, "No, don't worry about it," because that's where I grew up in my listening to music, a lot of American indie music. After the Smiths and Springsteen and the early 90s was the most important period for me because I learned a lot about wanting to do this myself. So I went to loads and loads of gigs, listened to loads of weird, obscure music. So that's where my true heart is when I make music. So when I saw Bob Pollard, and he said, don't worry, he said, you release records on a different scale to me. He releases records like every other week. He's got something out. But I'd kind of rather be like that.
You kind of had your moment with a kind of, you know, good indie, XL, and then you had your EMI moment. That was also sort of quite representative of the way people think, you know, whether to be that side, or now the third side, in fact, doing it yourself, you know.
Well, I started out with my own label, Twisted Nerve, and that's how people took notice of me. And then we collaborated with XL. I was signed with them. We were kind of a big independent. I mean, there's blurred lines between independent and major. I mean, when I eventually ended up on EMI, I found them to be as friendly a label as any independent I'd worked with, because the individuals you work with were just the same as anyone else, and they're actually brilliant. I just think EMI is a big entity. People are scared of it, and it made. I must admit, when I signed with EMI, it made me think differently. In a probably a negative way, and that's not to anyone's detriment, because the people I worked with were brilliant. Keith Wozencroft, who was the guy that signed me, and I love him to this day, and for supporting me. He was there at the start of my career as well. He wanted to sign me early on, but the thing about being attached with a big, you know, EMI, it's like a national institution. Well, maybe not now, but you know, that's what it stood for. So there's an excitement about being attached to something like that, but there's also like, well, I don't know, is it right? So I'm back full circle now to being, I can do what the hell I want, and it's like I'm self-employed, and I think the one thing that's a little bit sad about record companies, the demise of the industry as it used to be, is that old dream of being in this band, and one day that thing happens where someone says, I've just signed a record deal. Because that's what you aspire to. There's no getting away from that. As much as people are trying to be positive now about, well, you can do it yourself in your bedroom, there's still that thing. Imagine walking out and clicking your heels and going and telling your mum and dad, I've got a record deal, because they just think you've been bumming around doing nothing. Because
that was a funny thing at the end of the decade, when everyone was getting really pessimistic about the record industry, but young bands, often quite interesting bands, still wanted to sign a record deal, because that was like that moment you're talking about.
But I think it is, I think people would still want that, but they're having to accept that it's not there anymore. There aren't deals being done. There's a few, but not many, not as prolific as it used to be. And so it's it's kind of a shame, because that's the dream. It's almost like the dream's been taken away, but then you have to replace it with another one, which is doing it yourself. That's why when people ask me, can anyone write a song, I always say, I reckon everybody could, because I know I couldn't when I was 18, but I can now. You ask me, give me 5 days, I'll write you the best song ever. If somebody challenged me to do it, maybe this could be a reality show.
I'll bet you £100 then, because I made a bet with Eno the other day about bloody Coldplay, because he said he'd make a Coldplay track that I liked, and we bet £100. And then afterwards I thought, fuck, I've bet £100. He'll go off and make this really great track that completely transforms Coldplay reputation. It'll sell millions. Everyone will make a load of money, and I'll pay £100 for the bloody.
Is your betting, is that the recording budget, £100 as well?
It's mine, I think, yeah.
You must
you mean for you to write that great song?
Yeah.
£100, yeah.
You give me £100 to do that?
I'll give you £100, yeah.
So you don't like any Coldplay then?
No, it's no. Well, you know, you get those weird prejudices, don't you? And they're one of my, and I love Eno, and I'm a friend of Eno, and then Eno does Coldplay, and I still can't get, you know, so he's sort of, you know, trying to tell me that he'll persuade me.
The only thing that worries me about bands like that, like U2 and Coldplay and big bands that can fill those kinds of places, sometimes it sounds like the songs were specifically written to fill those places, and it's a different approach. You could sit and think about how to do that, and I think that's been a thing about this decade that's happened as well, is that there's a lot of those songs, and it happens on radio. You hear this style of production, and I'm just turned off by it. And it's no specific band, it's just a thing that's happened. It's like the X Factor phenomenon. How many times do you need to see somebody stood there with the wind blowing through their hair, singing that last final long note, with Simon Cowell looking proud? Sorry, but I'd rather eat a plate of my own excrement. It's just not necessary.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a brain in your head, it just doesn't float your boat. It's just the same thing week in, week out, series after series. Like to stand in a queue to impress Simon Cowell, is that all you've got in your life? I'm sorry. Do it yourself.
Whenever they say that thing on X Factor, which they say a lot with the judges, and they look at someone that's usually some scrubbed up young 17-year-old boy, and they say, "You look like a pop star." I often think of you, actually. You know, whether they'd ever say that to you, you look like a pop star.
I've often thought about it. Imagine if I'd ever walked into those auditions, how far would I have got? Because it's just. But that's what I love about doing what I do, is that it isn't right. It's not meant to be, but I've made it work, and I have got a talent that people appreciate, a certain type of people appreciate, and I've got a certain sense of pride about that, and about just doing it for myself, and I did it in my way, and nothing against people that are going down that route, but it's just got too much. It's like if people only aspire to that, queuing up at that X Factor audition, and it's their only chance, and they're walking away in tears because it's not worked. It's like going back a few decades. You lost your job, you'd have to get another one, or you failed your job interview or whatever it was. You just had to pick yourself up. These days, people think if it doesn't happen, if Simon Cowell doesn't say I'm good, it's over. If you do a list of the things you've loved throughout your life, it'll be very different to mine. Some of them might cross over, but that's what makes people interesting. Reading Mark Smith's book, just some of the things that reference it. He likes Neighbours, Dr. Carl in Neighbours, when he had that band. That's something he says in the book. The band, good band, great telly. I mean, is he bonkers or what? But that's why it's interesting. Cheers, Paul. Thank you very much. Cheers, mate.
Thanks for taking the time.
It's all right.